All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick, recording on a Tuesday afternoon, the final day of the fateful year of 2024. We're going to talk today about the NFC South. What better way to close out the year than talking about Panthers-Falcons and Bucks-Saints, and then we will talk about Bears-Packers as well, which is a game that does have stakes for the Packers. But let's start off with Panthers-Falcons. The Falcons are 8.5-point favorites. The total is 47.5. This is a Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern game. Who do you think's got the better quarterback here, Drew?
Ooh, what a question. Slight lean Falcons. And I think it's mostly just because we don't really know where the arc of Michael Penix Jr. is going to go. And you've seen enough, I think, in the starts that he's at least capable of, kind of being given the opportunity to be the guy for the Falcons as a franchise next year to prove it out. But I gotta say, Bryce Young they have effectively rescued what looks like a pretty lost career down in Carolina. I know that it hasn't come with wins, but that's actually good for the franchise in terms of maintaining some draft capital. And I, just in general, like some of the pieces that they have in Carolina to build around. So it's a question that we could probably revisit at the close of 2025 and still have a little bit of a question mark before answering. For this particular game, do I think Bryce Young should be getting 8.5 points? No. That's way too many. This is Panthers or pass. I don't know that the Panthers defense has really shown us that they can do much in the way of resistance, but I will say that the Falcons offense and really the game management that has been on display now for most of the balance of this season, but most notably at some ends of games and some key moments has been just pretty atrocious. And so I don't know that I trust the Falcons offense to be able to put together a game plan and keep their foot on the throat of the Panthers here. And I think the Panthers can exploit some of the weaknesses in the secondary of the Falcons. Panthers and Bryce Young have been at their best when they're not really in the face of an aggressive pass rush, and the Falcons can't really produce much of that right now. So I think Panthers are going to be fine here and effective and go score for score and maybe even make the Falcons sweat this one a little bit. So not maybe my favorite play across the card as we head into this final week of the season, but I've got 9 in pocket right now with this Panthers team, and I think at fair price ought to be on the other side of 7.
Okay. The Falcons are 17th in EPA per play as a defense this season. Whenever I watch the Falcons defense, I come away extremely underwhelmed. I think they've had some favorable matchups that is propping those numbers up. Their personnel seems fine. I don't know why they couldn't tackle at all against the Commanders, though there are some slippery players to tackle on that team. But what do you think is the issue with the Falcons defense? Do you think it's schematic? Do you think it's just a complete lack of a pass rush and that's just infecting everything else?
Yeah, it's talent in the front 7 for sure. They have a couple of nice players at the linebacker core, but they've been in and out because of health. And they're not really playing especially effectively down the stretch. And the style of defense that they're playing really does count on your linebackers being able to do their jobs so that you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you want to just construct your pass defense. The front 7 is, it's that they're lacking, explosive talent at the pass rush position. We know they know that because they made a move on the eve of the season to bring in Matthew Judon. And it turned out, he was not necessarily capable of producing anywhere close to the level we've seen in years past. And so that was kind of a whiff. But the pass rush itself they have had, it's worse than, I guess where I'm sure going there. It's worse than you even think, because they've had a complete cavalcade of terrible quarterbacks and questionable offensive lines that they've played all season long, and it's still they have not been able to be effective consistently. And I don't know that I really hold the scheme accountable for that as much as I would hold the construction of the roster. So when you're expecting guys like David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett to still be able to produce at a high level, creating interior pressure, I feel like you're kind of asking for it.
Yep, that makes sense. For all the talk of Bryce Young's renaissance, he is, since his benching, he is 18th in EPA per play among 26 qualifying quarterbacks. By the way, CJ Stroud 25th out of the 26. So Bryce Young winning that head-to-head matchup with the man that he will forever be associated with from the 2023 draft class. I mean, he's just slightly above he's just slightly in the positive in terms of his EPA per play contributed, but he hasn't had to play much in terms of defenses. Like, he's gotten these games against the Giants, the 2 games against the Bucs pass defense, which is terrible, the Cowboys, the Cardinals, the Saints. To be fair, he had to play Denver and didn't play particularly well in that one. So I do think it has been a little bit overblown. I mean, of the kind of the quarterbacks from that class who have dealt with a lot of adversity, particularly Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, who do you feel better about next year of those two? Because I think that there's probably those franchises just have to go into next year with those 2 guys as the starter.
Yeah, I mean, this was tricky because, again, like, my opinion of a young quarterback prospect is maybe more of a reflection of the tutelage that they're getting, right? Like, how do you feel about the offensive mind that is in charge of their development? I definitely feel like the answer for this question is Anthony Richardson and the Colts, because I think Steichen is a more impressive offensive mind than Canales, and that's not a huge margin there, but there's margin. And I think that Richardson obviously was a less well-developed prospect coming into the NFL and was going to take more time and was going to have, more opportunity for growth. And when you watch these two players side by side, Richardson and Bryce Young, the issues with Bryce Young seem to be just, general kind of ability to exist on a football field with much larger men, which is not fixable. And the price issues for Anthony Richardson are mechanics and just in general, like, learning how to play the position of quarterback, which is teachable. And so I think there's a decent chance that Colts and Richardson are pretty dynamic and outstanding through portions of next season. Now, his health is a bigger question mark. Richardson cannot stay on the field to save his life, which is brutal. But I think that given the benefit of the doubt and assuming that both have fully healthy seasons, I would put more stock in Richardson and Steichen being able to take a huge step forward. But I do think that expecting league average EPA per play production out of Bryce Young next year is the baseline now. I don't think that what you've seen in this back half of the season is fool's gold at all. You mentioned his EPA per play numbers since the benching are fine, but he's had a couple of very positive showings against good defenses, and I would look specifically at that Chiefs game, Week 12, coming out of the bye. He was really decent in that game, and that was against the Spagnuolo defense that was, dealing with some issues in their, health in the secondary there. But they gave the Chiefs a legit scare in that game, and his only real bad game that we've seen was against the Cowboys, and the Cowboys were just awesome that day at creating pressure. And so I think, with a full off season of reflection in terms of how the Panthers choose to roster this offense and what they choose to do to try to, kind of invest in the offensive line. And really, I guess maybe what'll kind of, their decision making this offseason will tell us a lot, right? If they use this opportunity and the space they have to try to go get free agents on the offensive side of the ball, then that tells us they think what they're building with Bryce Young is sustainable and is going to work and is worth seeing to the end. If they are more interested, I feel like, in addressing the defensive side of the ball, then to me that tells me they don't think they are realistically going to be rebuilding with Bryce Young next year, and that whatever they get from him next year is going to be gravy, and they're going to be looking to draft a quarterback the following year. So, very, very intrigued to see what their decisions tell us this offseason about how they want to carry forward this rebuild.
Yeah, kind of the issue with that, though, is that, like, last offseason, they spent all this money on the offensive line, and they traded for they get Deontay Johnson, and they draft Xavier Legette high, and it was all to put Bryce Young in the best position to succeed. They get Dave Canales, the quarterback whisperer, as their coach, and it's all to figure out whether Bryce Young is the guy. And the result is like, all right, well, I guess he's not the guy definitively. So there's more resources to make this probably below average quarterback, give him the best chance to succeed purely because he was taken number 1 overall. But yeah, I mean, he's probably shown enough that you have to roll it back. And he does that. Like he's mobile. He has been pretty solid at evading pressure. Thought, to your point, like he played really well against the Chiefs. Thought he played exceptionally well against the Eagles. And then also like lit up the Cardinals. That was his best game, albeit against the defense the defense that gave Matthew Stafford a lot of issues last weekend. So yeah, we'll see with Bryce Young. Not expecting any MVP ballot finishes ever in his future, but he may be competent. Okay, conference play heats up on the hardwood as we enter the new year. Catch a Big East showdown this Sunday when Providence takes on two-time defending national champion UConn at 2 p.m. Eastern, only on NBC and Peacock. All right, Saints, Bucks. Bucks are 13.5-point favorites. The total is 43.5. Bucks will clinch the NFC South with a win here or a Falcons loss in the game that we just talked about. This is another Sunday 1 p.m. game being played at the same time as the Falcons game. Do you expect this line to close over 2 touchdowns?
I do. I think the Buccaneers will clinch the NFC South with a win here against the Saints. And it, to me at least, the all of the signal you got last week from the Bucks against the Panthers is all you need to know about their mindset heading into this one. They were able to generate pressure at an absolutely absurd rate. Their quarterback pressure rate last week against the Panthers was almost 70%. Their defense is playing aggressively. That is their identity, and there is no expectation that they will take their foot off the gas there. That is a massive problem for what the Saints have right now in terms of pass protection. That is a massive problem in terms of what the Saints are going to have under center in this game. The Buccaneers offense similarly matches up extremely well with the Saints team that can't cover one option, let alone multiple options. Bucky Irving has clearly emerged as a top 10 backfield threat in the league, which is amazing to say because I did not know who Bucky Irving was before we started this season. I didn't know if I know who he was in the middle of the season, Jay. But Bucky Irving's for real. And honestly, the two-pronged attack that they have right now and the way that Liam Cohen has constructed this offense makes this Buccaneers team, live to score 40 points against the Saints, as you saw them score 48 pretty comfortably against the Panthers. And it's going to take basically a Baker Mayfield blow-up for this game to be competitive, in my opinion. And again, not my favorite look on the board at all, but I will be laying it with the Buckaroos.
Okay. What do you think about the Bucks' scope to do any further damage in the NFC? They're 14-1 at MGM to win the NFC.
It exists. It certainly exists. And you know what is kind of I have a future on them. There's a longer story behind it, and it's somewhat superstitious, so I won't go too into the woods here. But there's I have a little bit of hope that that there is a path that's favorable for them. They obviously, I guess here's the key though: do the Rams pull out anything to try to win against the Seahawks? Because the market right now expecting them to lay down. Don't know that I agree. But there are 3-point dogs right now against Seattle. And if the Rams are the 4 seed and the Bucks are the 3 seed, game on. Like that is exactly perfect situation for the Bucks to be in the NFC Championship game, in my opinion. We know they match up well against the Philadelphia Eagles. I know that when they played the Eagles were kind of in the younger, they were at the early stages of the development of that defense, but it was still such a clear mismatch in so many areas of the field and in general. Bucks matching up in that 2-3 is pretty solid. And I would even say it's a little bit of a foregone conclusion that they're going to get the better of a Jaden Daniels in the 3-6 matchup if they're the 3 seed, because number one, again, like they played them early, and that was obviously Jaden Daniels has progressed a lot since then. But young quarterbacks and Todd Bowles, like this is match made in heaven of him just absolutely eating, doing just significant damage to quarterbacks like that. So I feel like the Bucks are in a perfect situation if they get the 3 seed to make a run to the NFC title game. And then whoever's there, it could be anyway. I'm not even getting into the possibility that the likes of the Packers could eliminate the Eagles in the 2-7, and then all of a sudden the Bucks are home for 2 weeks, right? Like there is a lot of scope for them to do damage if they get the 3 seed. If they get the 4 seed, I'm feeling a little bit less excited. The 4-5 matchup is obviously kind of a nightmare. Like I don't think anyone is dying to play either the Lions, who are scoring 40 points a game, or the Vikings, who are for real in every sense of the word. And granted, if you're getting the Vikings and you're getting Sam Darnold in his first ever playoff game and it's at home, maybe you feel a little bit better, but it's still, you're probably dogs in that game. And so, comparing the two outcomes and the two paths is pretty massive. And so I think if I see ultimately that the dust settles and the Bucks are your 3 seed, they're live. If the dust settles and they're the 4 seed, then I'm probably going to go ahead and crumple up that ticket.
Yep. I think that is very fair. Just with that passing offense, they probably have the scope to win any individual game. They do have, I think, a pretty high ceiling game to game with that, but it's still, Baker has been awesome, 6th in EPA per play. He's risen a level, I think, and this offense is just so much more modern than last year's iteration on the balance, with their pass rate over expected, the creativity with Liam Cohen, and how they haven't really missed a beat since Chris Godwin went out. But the defense, ultimately, the pass defense is just probably going to get shredded at some point where it won't be viable. But yeah, they're a fun team and a good story. And you wouldn't be shocked at all if they win a playoff game. All right, the NFC's number 1 seed is on the line this Sunday night when the Vikings take on the Lions in Detroit. Coverage of the showdown that wraps up the regular season begins at 7 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock.
As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up to BetMGM yet, use bonus code BETEDGE, and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code BETEDGE. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code BETEDGE when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code BETEDGE and get your $1,500 first bet offer today.
Okay, let's close out with an NFC North showdown. More just a game. Just a game. In the NFC North, the Bears are 9.5-point favorites in Green Bay. The total is 40.5. The Packers do have stakes where they can move up to the 6th seed should the Commanders lose, though that is unlikely. But it seems like the Packers are going to play their guys. So do you think that this line is going to get to double digits?
I think it ought to. And I think it mostly comes down to is Chicago fielding a defense. I was, notably like I watched Bears Seahawks. Don't ask me why. But I did. And I was surprised about the level of effort you saw from the Bears. But, they're primetime game, final home game. A lot of those guys trying to make sure they have positions on this roster next year. And now here we are in a game that really is not, not meaningful despite the rivalry. And I think that the Bears defense is in extremely dire straits here against the Packers offense that is capable of putting them down 3 scores in the blink of an eye. The Packers offense, other than the games that they've played against the Vikings late in this season, they're as good as anyone out there. And I think the combination of, pass protection with Love, when he has a healthy set of wide receivers and Josh Jacobs is good enough to, make this effectively a non-compete. Bears offense is, it certainly wasn't fixed when they fired Shane Waldron and elevated Thomas Brown. But then it became especially unfixed when they elevated Thomas Brown to head coach, and it was very unclear who was responsible for coordinating the offense. And it just kind of feels like watching the Bears since the firing of Getsy that they're just sort of an uncoordinated team. And that's not good to be covering a big number on the road like this in a game that is effectively, a walkover. So, I think this does get to 10. I think Green Bay's had a lot of market support over the last couple of weeks that is notable. And I think the cavalry will come again for them this week. And I think my fair price for this one is 10.5. I think that's probably where it closes. And so if you want to capture the key at 10, I think you need to do it earlier in the week.
What do you think the line will be if the Vikings play the Packers again in the playoffs in Minnesota, stripping out like the Vikings would probably most likely, if there was to be a matchup, they'd have a rest advantage because it'd probably be in the 1-7 after a bye. But stripping that out, like this game closed effectively pick on the weekend. Do you think that, and they only won by 2 points and they won by Cam Akers' fingertips basically, but do you think there'll be a reevaluation of those two teams after that game?
Both of the games were so similar, and both of the games were such positive game states for the Vikings that I feel like there is just certainly scope for an outcome to be different and the market to be kind of stubborn. I could see Vikings close in the ballpark of -2. Is this kind of, I guess there's one wrinkle though, Jay. If this game is happening, it's either in the NFC title game or it's the 1-7 and the Vikings are coming off the bye. So it's probably going to be like 3.5 if that's the case. But I would say that, in the blind, just remaking that market, there was a decent amount of kind of late week support, I thought, for Minnesota that flipped them to small favorites before it came back down to close pick. So there's there's two-way opinion here on who, on what the gap between these two teams is. Now I know that all of these numbers we're talking about around a pick 'em not really like that meaningful in terms of value. So it's we're talking about within the VIG for the most part. But I would say that 2.5 with no bye, 3.5 with a bye would be my my general guess if we see that game again.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting because just watching these two teams, and I know that statistically the Packers have been, an elite offense and a better offense than Minnesota, but just watching these two teams, I feel like Minnesota has a better defense. I think Minnesota has a better offense. I think Minnesota have better coaching. So I don't really understand the construction that gets you to the Packers having been pick on the road. And also I think there is an element of, to your point about game state, both of those games, it's kind of like when in soccer, if a team goes up 3-0 and then the team that's trailing then compiles like a lot of XG because the other team just stops attacking because they're with the same vigor because they don't need to, because they're just kind of bleeding out the clock in a way. And then it's like, oh, wow, Crystal Palace beat Brentford on XG even though they lost the game 3-1 or whatever. It's like, well, no, that's not a reflection of how the game actually played out. So I do think there is an element of that, though at the same time, it's impressive that impressive-ish, that Love was able to get them back in both of those games, despite being in very clear and obvious passing sets, which has been kind of a knock on Jordan Love. If he is a bit of a play action, second and 2 deep shot type of merchant that's heavily reliant on his running game. And he has, against, again, defenses that were playing with huge leads, he has been able to, get the game back into meaningful state.
I will say 2 things about Love that I don't understand. Or one thing I don't understand and how that plays into what we saw both times between Vikings and Packers. And maybe this is a for Love problem, but he is his best when they're out of the scripted portion of the offense. He is his best when the game state is wildly in flux. Like, oh man, we 10% chance to win here. Like, how are we going to do this? Like, that seems to be when he performs his best. Second half of games, second half of seasons. It's a bizarre kind of character trait that I don't think is necessarily signal, but it's just very clearly there in the data now for 2 years. But I would say that the opposite has been pretty apparent with the Vikings, where in the scripted portion, clinical. Like, they are so good at being able to get themselves into a positive game state. And then after that, it's a little bit of a, let's hope Sam Darnold doesn't throw us out of that game state. And for the most part, he has been very effective at that this year, which is why this is a 14-win team. And so, I think like this same paradigm existed last year when the Packers went into the playoffs. And guess what? They had success early against the Cowboys, and then they were just an unstoppable machine rolling downhill. Cowboys were never even in that game, and it was all because of just general, like when they hit their stride offensively in any game in any portion of a season, they're a juggernaut. And you don't never because the scripted portions don't always work. You don't know in any game whether it's going to come, and so. The offense is just, it's this wildly volatile commodity to try to price, whereas the defense, I think, is very clearly very overrated by the market. Like, you look at their EPA per play numbers, 4th best in the NFL. Okay, great. You take away turnovers, they're the freaking Raiders. Like, this is not a defense that you can necessarily expect to keep you in games if you are up against a good quarterback on the road, and the pass defense in particular, which is looks better on paper, I think, than it is in reality, is kind of the way that you want to kind of keep in mind pricing these guys. So if they're up against a team that can defend and pass rush well, and if they're up against a team that has more than one weapon in the passing game, they're in trouble. And so I think that really kind of comes down to how do you I'm looking into the future here. I want to kind of understand what kind of prices we're going to see on Eagles, Packers, and what the right side there is.
Yeah, I think it might just be some bias seeping in because Jordan Love, the Packers, cost me a lot of money in that stupid Tommy DeVito game on Monday Night Football last year. It just seems like he's not particularly accurate. Like, even some of the throws against Minnesota, it's like, why are you missing by so much? Like, he's 18th in the NFL in completion percentage over expected out of 35 qualifiers. So not like awful. And he throws down the field a ton. He has a very low expected completion percentage, but there's just some, and look, he can make all the throws. I think he should probably use his legs a little bit more than he does. And perhaps that'll ramp up in the playoffs, because that is pretty valuable. And he has been playing hurt this year. I think Jordan Love's a very quarterback. The guy, he finished like top 5 in the NFL in EPA per play last year. And I just don't think he's kind of played, well, he hasn't played at that level because he's not at that level. But there are some kind of suspect elements to Love's game. But, he is very high ceiling. Wouldn't shock me at all if the Packers are playing in an NFC title game. But I think there are some flaws with that team that Minnesota exposed, particularly on defense. All right, we are done for today. Don't forget to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, don't forget to rate and subscribe. Also, a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From myself and Drew, we'll see you soon.